Yeah, actually, you're right. It was International Women's Day. Yeah, but she's a woman, but I'm not. So, but happy International Women's Day to you, Mabel. Okay, so
Thanks for
first things
supporting
first.
women as well.
Absolutely. First things first. To everyone that took their time today to join us, thank you for joining us. And I would just wanted to say a few things before we start, right? One of the things, the most important thing, is that this is literally the first time I'm seeing Mabel in person. Okay, so just to when I say that, is basically to reiterate the fact that we didn't really do any rehearsal at all. So everything that you're going to be hearing here, that we're going to be sharing here, is going to be really organic and authentic, right? So the hope is that this session, I'm going to be asking a number of questions, and the hope is that through Mabel's insights and answers, you might find things that you can find quite useful, things that you can apply in your daily practices if you're looking for a role, if you want to know more about compliance and so on and so forth. So without further ado, I say, hey Mabel, welcome and thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks IBF for arranging this. And also, we have 55 attendees and counting, some of whom are dialing in during the workday. So thank you very much to all for spending your time.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, and okay, so because we sort of have limited time, right? So I'm just going to just dive in right there. And the first question I always ask is like the icebreaker question. It's like the question I ask everyone, and basically it is to just talk to you about your career history, right? Going back to the early days, like your career aspirations when you were younger, right? Did you always want to study law? And of course, how did you get into compliance? Because I always like to joke with people, like, you don't wake up one day when you're 16 or 17 years old and say, hey, you know what, I really want to be I really want to be a compliance officer. So for you, tell us a bit about your career evolution, how you got into law, and then of course how you moved into compliance.
Yeah, I think it would be a very strange 16 or 17-year-old to wake up and want to do compliance. So I think starting the first part of your question on why I chose law, right? Also, you don't wake up as a young kid and say, oh, I want to be a lawyer, but things happen along the way that guide you towards a certain decision. So I think I can trace it back to reading a lot when I was young. So I was an only child growing up. I actually had a half brother, but he was an adult by the time I was born. So I spent a bit of time with myself, in and out of libraries. And if you read a lot, you start to write reasonably well. And it got to the extent that in secondary school, I actually won a national essay competition. So people would naturally say, oh, you write well, you can become a lawyer. And during that time, and this starts to show my age, right? There were programs like Paper Chase and LA Law in the 80s, and that really intrigued me. So I applied to law school. And this is where I think a bit of blind luck starts to emerge as a theme in my career. I actually didn't get allocated to law school at the start. I was given a spot in business administration, which maybe tells you my grades were also not top, right? But what happened 2 weeks into term, a space opened up in law school. So somebody must have gone to another course or decided to go overseas, and that paved the way to me becoming a lawyer. So blind luck, right? It could have worked out differently, but I was quite happy in biz ed anyway, because you can tell from my career, I've been in business and finance for the bulk of it. I didn't practice as a lawyer, but I did think it's easier to become a business person with a law degree than the other way around. So that is my background to why I ended up being a lawyer. So some blind luck. Then for the compliance career decision, what happened was that I was pursuing my master's overseas around the time of the first financial crisis. So if you think about 97, for those of you who remember that, who are old enough, not a lot of jobs to be had, right? In the throes of financial crisis, where Indonesia, Thailand, all the countries around us facing problems. So I wasn't actually sure what to do with myself, but in business school, they encourage you to read the Financial Times. And there was one day I must have begged or borrowed a copy, and I opened it in the job ad section. And there was an ad for a Goldman Sachs compliance officer in Singapore. So 20-something interviews later, I got the job. So imagine if I hadn't opened a newspaper at that time, I would have had a different career track as well. But, in those days, there weren't big job boards and, careerfutures.com, that sort of thing to actually look through. So that's how I ended up. A bit of blind luck in both cases. But I think what I had to say, in case people think, oh, Mabel's just lucky, I think you have to create the environment to, for good things to happen.
That's awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna derail right now, and I'm just gonna I'm going to just hone into what you said, right? Like you were there and just applied to Goldman's. There was opening, and then 20 interviews later, you got the role. Okay, so this is important to people who are job seeking right now, right? It seems like a magic. I applied, I got interviewed, bam, interview. If you can remember, right? What do you think helped you nail that job? Was it like a high quality resume? What kind of resume did it look like? And also, interviews at Goldman's is notorious for 20, 30 interviews, right? So what were the things that you feel helped you, like let's talk about even like the resume, so like what did it look like? What do you think was in your resume that helped you get an audience with them? And then maybe part two would be, when your interviews, how did you consistently ace those interviews? Is there something that I can put you on the spot a little bit on?
Yeah, well, the reason why I thought I could apply and have a good chance in the first place was because in between law school and business school, I actually did a stint as a prosecutor in the commercial affairs department. So I thought, okay, I have a bit of regulatory know-how, but specific to, financial crimes and that sort of thing. And then, of course, I learned a lot during business school. I even was in NYU for exchange semester, took all the, finance courses I could. And then, basically, for Goldman looking for a person in Singapore, being a Singaporean is obviously, a good thing to have, right? Someone familiar with the culture, etc. So just to mention, in case I didn't, I was actually in Europe at the time in Amsterdam. So I had to fly to Hong Kong for interviews and do interviews with New York on the phone and so on and so forth. So it was quite an exciting time. So my CV obviously did have some positive points for the recruiter to consider. But what I was also careful to do is that you have to sell yourself, right? So the points that I mentioned, I basically turned a bit into a sales pitch during my interview, because you have to be, especially with American firms, I have to say, I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to work for American firms. People grow up in an environment at school there in a very show and tell culture, right? So you have to say, look, I'm Mabel. These are the three things I feel I can bring to you, and actually go through what I said, right? And then basically challenge them to find out somebody who can actually tick the same boxes. So I think that actually helped for me, which I suppose answers both of your questions.
Oh man, that's awesome. Because okay, guys, so people who are in this session, I did not pay Mabel to say that. Like that's a model answer, in terms of selling yourself. Because we always understand that the resume actually is it's more of a marketing document, right? To showcase the best of yourself, right? And vis-a-vis the job they're looking for. So I think that really hits the spot. Okay, now with that out of the way, the next proper question back on the rails again would be, hindsight, okay, like compliance when you were starting out, versus compliance, I suppose, after or just before you left UBS, right? I mean, like the evolution of what you've seen in that 2 decades or so later, right? What was some of the things that were sort of important back then that you feel that were less important toward the end of your banking career, right? And then I guess there's a part two to that, would be then compare and contrast your time now in Drive Wealth, and that iteration or that version of compliance. Can you sort of structure an answer to that kind of a broad question?
Okay, I guess onto the first point of what changed, right, and what became less important. In fact, everything became more important and and more things became more important. If I talk about compliance as a whole, not even just financial crime, right? So I would say compliance, when I first started out in the late 90s, Of course, you had, requirements like, AML, CFT, you needed to do investment suitability assessments. But all this was prior to, okay, let me illustrate. At the point where when I started, the Singapore MES 626 equivalent, which is the rules governing AML and countering the financing of terrorism in Singapore, was probably only about 15 or 20 pages. Now it's become at least 4 or 5 times that, right? So the world has gotten a lot more complex. And when you come to topics like investment suitability, concepts like accredited investor, professional investor, high net worth investor, and all sorts of like levels of sophistication creep in. And the world has really changed towards more, shall we say, oversight and constant supervision. Even, the latest news that you read around WhatsApp and recording, the messages, right? All that, would have been something nobody would have even dreamed of, that we were all chatting to each other on our mobile phones like 20 years hence, right? But the beauty in a very simple environment compared to now is that I was able to expose myself to different parts of compliance, because compliance was not so specialized in its different subcategories now. Because right now you have like equities compliance, you have fixed income compliance, you have electronic communications compliance. There's somebody that just looks at, transaction monitoring and all that. But in the past, all that was done by one small team, and then you're able to actually go around and learn a lot. But having said that, there's still opportunities to learn now. So even though you don't have the career opportunity like me to go through the different jobs, I think you can actually, keep an open mind, be curious within the bank, ask questions, learn as much as possible of other forms of compliance or the job that you are doing. And I really, try and to immerse yourself in that whole corporate culture and products, and know as much as possible.
Yeah. And okay, so jumping to Drive Wealth, where you sort of are now, and this question relates to the entire sort of like the theme of this session, right? Is how did Drive Wealth come about, right? And maybe we can start by you telling us a little bit more about what the business is, and then then telling us perhaps how you made that move into it, after spending, so many years in traditional banking.
To be honest, it wasn't something I sought out. So again, a theme of, some of blind luck, right? I did know that I wanted a change at a certain point of my career. Hence the reason I left UBS as my last full-time employer. So what happened was I was doing kind of part-time roles, and one of them was with Julius Baer, another was with the consulting firm Simpulse, right? And my ex-colleague, who I knew from UBS and had left UBS, he was basically my counterpart in the regional role that I had. So he was head of the Americas. Actually, looked at what I was doing on LinkedIn, I think, which was not very much doing part-time roles, and decided to reach out to me on LinkedIn and say, hey, do you want to get involved in something that I've got myself into? So what I would say is that this is just a chance thing coming out of opportunities due to people that you meet during your career, right? Building a network within the bank. And also sometimes, this might happen with parties that you meet outside the bank within the institution. So it's great to know as many people as possible, because you never know what might come out of it. So it's a pretty long drawn process. We talked back and forth for a while, and then I joined them in May of last year. So here's my Drive Wealth t-shirt as part of my onboarding.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, and in terms of like telling us a bit more about the Drive Wealth's business, for example, right? Okay, can you explain it to the folks here who may not be familiar with what the firm does?
Okay, our founder and CEO actually had a vision to make stock trading as easy as buying a coffee. So how do we buy a coffee now, right? We sort of like take out our phone, an app, or scan a QR code, or just, basically, flash it against a device. So what we do is to provide the brokerage technology to enable other payment wallets and digital banks to embed this into their apps. So for example, to illustrate, I think an illustration is best. Like in the US, one of our customers actually has this facility called Roundup. So if you go and buy a coffee for $5.50, and you can round up the amount to $6, and the 50 cents can be used to purchase a stock of your choice. So every day you buy a coffee, you're actually starting to amass a stock portfolio, and dollar cost averaging without thinking so much about it. So this is great for early investors, but not just for small investors. Our technology is actually robust enough to actually execute large whole share investments as well, which is what some of our other customers do. And closer to home, we have one of our global partners, Revolut, that has just launched the stocks trading function in their app in Singapore. So you can do exactly that, where you can spend your $1 in your wallet and buy shares of a list of US stocks. And the reason that is powerful, some securities in, one share trades for, say, $2,000 over dollars in some case, like Booking.com share, not to recommend any securities to anyone, but just as an illustration, if you buy one share of Booking.com, it's $2,000 over dollars, right? So you're able to buy, $10 of it if you're interested in that or something else with a large single share value. You can just do that within an available app right now with the FX and all that being performed very seamlessly.
Okay. So here's the thing. Now, as you're talking about all these really hip and 21st century stuff, right? And then I'm trying to marry the fact that you came from, the traditional sort of brick and mortar, very hallowed halls of big banks, right? And then now you're talking a totally different jargon, perhaps. Okay, so I want to again focus in on, those unique selling propositions that you brought that, that Drivewell saw, I mean, okay, apart from the fact that having a strong network, which is something that I gather that you had, and it just chance that someone tapped you on the shoulder for this, but then I guess the onus was on you to then demonstrate what you brought to the table. And so can we talk a little bit about that in terms of how did you how did you sell yourself, or maybe framing it the other way, what do you think that the firm saw in your profile that could be quite valuable for them?
Yeah, I think going by, how I was introduced to the firm, knowing somebody who had joined it, on the US side, I think they knew my background and, what my CV was, right? So the interview process was fairly straightforward. After that, it wasn't like a Goldman Sachs type of process. But I think maybe what uniquely I brought to the table as compared to some, long-term managers is that, this is my view, right? That I can still, roll out my sleeves and do the job, because I think that sometimes as you become a manager, you delegate a lot and you have SMEs, subject matter experts in your team, right? And you start to forget where the rule is, which paragraph and what form you have to use, and so on and so forth. But I could pick up all that really fast again, because along the way I had been involved quite deeply, and I think that's hopefully what my team appreciated in the past, that I was a boss could also still do the job. So that to me was a USP. The other thing I suppose that maybe jumped out to them in the whole CV was the fact that I did spend some time with US firms in the past, so I knew a bit about the regulation in which they operate in, because brokerage supervision in the US is pretty tight. I even took some of the securities exams when I was in Goldman and Morgan Stanley way back when, right? So I know a bit, not like an extreme amount, but I know a bit to be comfortable and to give people some sense of credibility in that organization. So, for example, if I were to, apply for a job in a Chinese fintech, I don't think I would stand up really well. So, in the end, you'd have to choose the organization that works best towards your set of skills.
Okay, yeah, totally agree. Very in sync there as well. I mean, again, sort of like in our careers programming as well, we talk about specific areas and on the themes that you're talking about. So very, 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 very applicable yeah, so words of wisdom from you. Okay, and so the next question I'm thinking about would be something to do with culture, right? Coming from big banks like UBS, for example, versus something as nimble as drive well, for example, right? Has there been any sort of like challenges that you faced culturally in terms of how things are done? I mean, are these things new ways of working, different from the past, and also, but very, very much sort of in your comfort zone or otherwise?
Yeah, well, it's always hard to compare with, between a small and large organization, right? I mean,
Mm,
in Rockwell, there's a few hundred people, mostly in the US. In Singapore, we've
mm,
got, I can tell you, we have 4 people right now. So we're very scrappy right now. But large institutions, also, especially if they've been around a long time, Drugwell's been around 10 years,
yep.
but in some institutions, it's been years of regulatory issues and challenge and complexity that has shaped the firms that various banks have ended up being. So I would say very different. And for me to join startup. 10-year startup like DriveWell, had to basically roll up my sleeves and do lots of things, not just what I mentioned in terms like forms to dig up, to fill up for MAS and all
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah.
even get involved in things, because if you're a small team, you kind of have to divide and conquer, right? Like, I end up like looking around for the insurance package. I was trying to find, how to get a speaking spot in the FinTech Festival for our I was visiting CEO to speak at, even like outside counsel, because we don't have a legal team right now, but luckily I have a bit of a legal background. So contrary to how it is set up in the law, is set up in the bank, I mean, where legal teams are the ones that speak to lawyers, I've had to like jump in and try and negotiate fees and select the right firm and so on and so forth. So, but it's great, because for me, it exposes myself to lots of things I otherwise would not have had, been able to do in a more traditional financial institution.
I guess a lot of it, I guess, hinges on how comfortable you are, like. Because I guess when we talk to folks who are looking for a new career, if they spend a lot of time in a very like brick and mortar type, like traditional bank, then moving out of that into something new, sort of like rattles their comfort zone, and they're not really good at working at this kind of speed or fluidity, or like on a four-man team. They're very happy to be like one cog in the whole machinery, whereas for some people like yourself, you sort of embrace the fact that you do a lot more right now. It's very nimble, it's very fluid, and so on and so forth. But I guess for some people, they don't have that kind of like that comfort level. Do you think it's something that they can learn, or they can embrace, or what's your thoughts on that? Open-ended question, basically,
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you can. I mean, you have to, first of all, decide to push yourself at least once, right? I've been
Mm,
also in situations where, people have come to me and said, can you run this global project, or
mm.
do this extra thing? And I go, oh, I'm really not sure. But then you just say, you force yourself to say yes, and then you just navigate it, right? You just throw yourself into the deep end. And once you do that, then you realize, hey, that's not too bad, because there's, people I can tap on, things I can learn about that, don't make that experience so scary after the initial maybe few days or hours as it may be. So I do think that if you want to achieve change, you have to put yourself a bit out
Out
there,
there.
some
Mhm.
risk, and expose yourself, because doing the same thing, if you just want to do the same thing, then I guess you can stay where you are, but the problem is that you're going to end up pigeonholing yourself, right? I always say, don't pigeonhole yourself when other people are not pigeonholing you. Please go out, and one of the
Mm.
easy ways, if you don't want to throw yourself into doing something very, very different, just start to take courses, right? I think that if you are interested in something, even tangentially, just put yourself into a course. A lot of grants still available. And in keeping with networking, it also gives you a great chance to meet other people, and who knows what happens from those conversations.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point, and I guess that there's also a question on that, right? In terms of taking courses, or in more specifically maybe certifications, right? Because don't really know about the demographics of everyone that's here, but for folks who are interested in moving into compliance, for example, okay, so maybe I'll structure in maybe two parts, right? People who are interested in moving to compliance, right? Are there some really useful certifications that kind of like act as a signal to the market that they're interested in the space, like ACAMS, IC diplomas, CACs and so on and so forth, right? Some of them are required. But are there anything that you feel that if you were a hiring manager and you looked at this and then you saw this sort of like certification that would be very appealing to you? That's part one. And then part two, right? I don't know whether there's an answer to this, but when you're working with a fintech, right, are there new sets of certifications, regulations, or that one can think about maybe picking up as well, specific to to fintechs, for example?
Yeah, maybe I'll take the last one first, because
Mm,
then the first part probably takes a longer answer. I think that when it comes to fintechs and certifications, I suppose you can do yourself a bit of a favor by looking again at the job ads that's out there, right?
mm.
I mean, there are lots of different kind of fintechs. There's red techs, there's fintechs, there's
Insurtechs, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
there's crypto, there's some things more traditional, like in the space that I'm working, although we do have, some crypto dreams at some point. So you can look at what these jobs are asking for, right? And it may even be something like ESG. There's like tech providers focused on ESG measurement and things like that. Then
Mm,
clearly you have to learn something about ESG, right? So
mm,
it's up to you to figure out what kind of fintech you think you fit into, and look at some of the job ads that are similar, and try to go a bit closer to the kind of the job specifications that are being published
mm,
out there. But in terms of, for people who are currently in other roles in financial institutions and want to move to compliance, I think that it's not so much a course that you have to take. I think the first thing that you can think about is actually get to know your compliance people, right? Talk to them, ask whether there are opportunities. And it's always easier to go for a lateral move instead of, quitting and going to another bank and learning about compliance from scratch. I've always actually encouraged that, and I've always wanted to hire actually more people. Let's say if you have people from, again, operations or finance or whatever,
mm,
they know the bank, and frankly, it doesn't take much to train somebody to start doing some compliance work, and then incrementally from there. So I think most compliance teams in most institutions are quite happy to look at internal transfers. You don't have to take a course for that. But for somebody who wants something on their CV to show, clearly you mentioned, ACAMS, ICA, and others. And lately, and I guess, to disclose my, kind of affiliation, the Wealth Management Institute, I'm a
there we go.
faculty
Yeah.
member there for financial crime, courses, right? They've also started a compliance certification. So it was a diploma that was available, but you can do modules and get a certificate instead. So that has seen quite a good take up. And what I obviously like about it is like people who are teaching are still doing the job in compliance in various banks across the street. So it brings you very real life experience. And it's not just wealth management that's covered, it's also investment bank and asset management. So you can pick and choose the modules that are appealing to you. But compliance aside, I think that in the new economy, you have to think broadly about what's happening. And I mentioned ESG, this
Mm,
blockchain, AI, whatever, right? Of course, you can, learn a lot about it just looking at YouTube and reading and keeping your mind open and being curious. But of course, if you want something more structured, a lot of courses out there. I've taken some of them, like Blockchain Association of Singapore, has a course regarding compliance and also other topics. I've done one online with the Basel Institute of Governance. So you can sign yourself up for these things, and also beyond doing courses, just be aware of changes, right? If you read about ChatGPT and you think, oh, that's interesting, but you don't bother to sign up for an account and work, and use it, then I think that's a shame, right? You got to expose yourself to new technology, particularly when it's free.
mm, mm. Okay, good point. And Oh, also another question just sort of popped up in my head, right? I'm going back again to what you do right now. What are sort of like the challenges then do you face on a daily basis, or at least now, that's maybe, I guess, maybe synonymous with working in a small nimble company, right? I mean, what are sort of some of the challenges or yeah that you are currently trying to deal with, if you can
Yeah.
disclose, lah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, for us, we were going through a license application. So
Mm-hmm.
that, had involved a bit of work, but it's probably, quite straightforward in the
Mm-hmm.
sense that MES, tells you quite upfront what they need. So I wouldn't cite that as a challenge. I think what has
Mm-hmm.
been a challenge to me, maybe picking up what I said about the different things I've had to be involved in, is that not everything in this space is on the internet, right? I think in traditional banks, you're able to find a policy on anything internally, then look up the regulation. You have internal people who are experts in certain areas. With a small outfit, I've had to be more creative, right? Because even something like base capital for our incorporation is like, it's where should it sit, when should it come in, US dollars are okay, so on and so forth. I had to actually sit down and discuss this with corporate secretaries and all that. So you have to find ways to get information, even from other fintechs, be shameless in calling up people. I've asked people, like, for example, hey, what internal audit firm are you thinking of using, or have you engaged? The Singapore Fintech Association is also useful in setting up fora where you can, again, rock up to people and ask questions. It's quite a friendly bunch there. So I've had to go out and learn things which don't have a nice to-do checklist on the internet somewhere.
Okay. And then I suppose the next question I thought about, right, was basically a statement, and I want you to, in the spirit of the legal profession, please debunk or present a counter argument for this statement. And the statement is, I'm over 40 or 50, and there's very little chance of me getting hired in a startup. Okay. So we know that you're living proof that it can be done, but many believe that due to age and seniority and maybe assumed mindsets, right? Some pivots like this are unlikely. But, what's your take?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think besides me being evidence, there's actually a lot of people I've met who are beyond 40, even beyond 50. And I do have, 60 something year old examples as well, right?
Oh, share.
If you want to run a successful startup, right, you need people with experience, and also people to navigate, the regulatory environment sometimes. So people who have had experience, up to a few decades, it will bring a lot to the table. So I do think there are a few fintechs out there which are run by 20, 30-year-olds, and they're more comfortable with just other 20, 30-year-olds. But if they want to scale up, get licensed, do the job properly, I think it needs some people with gray hairs. So, that's where I think a lot of you who feel that you're older, if you have a particular skill you think you can bring to the table, why not, right? Don't rule it out.
Okay, that's great. So for folks who are out there who are thinking it can't be done, well, we know it can be done. It's how you sort of plan that journey or that pathway. Okay, and I suppose I want to make some time for the questions that are sort of coming in. I want to talk about another. I guess maybe I'll make this the last question from me at least. And it's also pertaining to something that we face as career advisors, and it's sort of similar to the previous ones about mindset, right? So a lot of people operate on that BAU mindset, right? They find themselves out of work, and then the mindset has maybe been sort of like stuck in this. I can only do this one thing. This is the only thing I know. Or I can't do this, or I can't do that, right? I shouldn't even try. I suppose what would be your advice or sort of encouragement to the folks who find themselves in this space, in this sort of like, I don't know what the space of, maybe a negative mental space, and feeling like, I've been doing this for like 30 years. The rug's just been pulled from under my feet due to restructuring or whatever it is, and it's the only thing I know. And I don't think anyone else is going to hire me, right? How do you what sort of advice do you think you can give to folks who find themselves in that kind of situation?
Yeah. To get yourself a bit of a, if it's a rut, but it was a negative connotation, I think a bit of a different phase in your life. I think you just have to shake things up a bit, right? I did mention, doing different courses. Why not? If you have spare time right now, use the time to improve yourself, get involved in industry associations. I think that's another powerful area where you can build good contacts, right? And since it was International Women's Day yesterday, I can mention Financial Women's Association, right? I was involved in it and still am to a certain degree. So, and they welcome men too. So, there are lots of events going on all the time where you can meet people from all sorts of different financial roles, right? It's not just banks, it's also associated companies. So kind of do that. And then when it comes to industry associations, whether it's like, you're interested in AML, there's ACAMs, there's also, webinars and courses and things you get involved in. So there are opportunities to actually do things that are different from an educational and networking point of view. And if you have the capability to teach, because you've been, doing something really well over the past few years, sign up to teach something, right? There's a lot of training organizations out there. They're looking for good people, so you can do that. And lastly, to keep it in touch with the industry, take a contract role. I mean, like I did that after my stint, after I decided to kind of take a break and find the next thing. I did contract work with Julius Baer, and again, blind luck plus knowing people, right? There are new people there, and got the role pretty quickly. Then Simpulse came to know about through also friends, and I took that up, and I continued to teach in the Wealth Management Institute. So it was actually a nice blend of work prior to this part-time, prior to the drywall role coming up. And I also continued to teach from time to time. So there's lots of ways to be engaged. It's really up to your creativity and time and personal circumstances.
Awesome. We got some really good questions right now, and we're gonna try to take them. Okay, so the first one's from Samuel, and I think Samuel's from UBS, right? Yeah, and thank you also, because I recognize the name Samuel. I think you just also connected with me on LinkedIn, so thank you for that. And I think he knows you, right? So so Sam says this: thanks, Mabel, for sharing your experience. Staying in one job throughout one's working life is less common than it used to be, and it sounds like you have had a varied and interesting career. Compliance seems multifarious enough to allow work in new areas and perhaps even industries. Do you have any thoughts on life post-compliance, and how can one find such opportunities?
Yeah, I think
new areas and new industries. Okay.
Well, Sam has been a great part of my varied and interesting career. So thanks, Sam, for the question. I would just summarize that, a lot of I said about getting out there, networking, getting in touch with people in other or associated industries is very powerful. Another option I had thought about, and this is something that's probably relevant for anyone in the wealth management space, is the growing family office and trust services area, right? So to add more support to what I said before about taking courses, I did that myself. I actually did my certification in family office and trust services, and you meet a lot of people there from other from family offices, from service providers. And I think if I had wanted to take on a part-time or other role in one of the institutions, it would have been not embarrassing or difficult to just call up somebody you meet during a course or a session and say, hey, do you have something for me? Or do you know whether there's something out there that could suit someone with my background, right? So I do think, meeting people outside of your current sphere of association is very, very important. So, and Sam, a lot of people yourself. So I'm sure any random conversation will yield some interesting opportunities to follow up with.
Okay, good. Okay, and then thanks for the question, Sam. So the next one from anonymous attendee, specializing in an area of compliance can be both beneficial and detrimental. Beneficial for becoming a subject matter expert and rising up the ranks, but detrimental in the sense that the market and other employers might only see you as a one-trick pony. Fair enough. The higher up you go. How do you overcome this if you have already spent more than a decade in one area of compliance, for instance, portfolio management compliance? So that is a very good question. That was one of the questions I actually wanted to ask about, how you kind of maneuvered across, the umbrella, the different parts of compliance. So I think this person, thank you, has
Yeah.
asked that question already. Yeah.
And this, I guess, also align a little bit to what I said about how things get so specialized nowadays, right? In the past, I was kind of hopping from one role to, or rather, I shouldn't say that. I was basically covering a lot of different types of compliance and, let's say, a head of compliance role, right? It cover everything from licensing to dealing with complaints to AML, and actually one job, including, portfolio compliance in one of my previous roles where, you have to like check that investment mandates are being, followed. So I suppose, this is probably the trickiest part, that trying to break out of your specialization. And I only really see two ways about this, right? Kind of like getting more responsibilities within the compliance space in the organization that you're working now, right? Or doing a lateral move if possible, right? But if you're working in an asset manager, there's probably only so many roles that you can go into, but you can ask for more responsibilities, whether it's like looking at, the employee compliance area, licensing, etc., as compared to, maybe what you're talking about, more kind of looking at the asset management activity itself. And then if you get a bigger overview, it's easier to then go to another employer externally and say, I'm not just a portfolio compliance person, I've done this, that, and everything else. The other is to actually then, if you have, particular projects that you'll be involved in where you can sell your particular expertise in, an area of compliance, besides portfolio compliance, say, is to sell it to a future employer, right? Say, for example, if you're I'm just, making all this up, right? If, let's say, your firm has been looking at crypto and you've been involved in a project where you've been looking at the crypto requirements and what it would entail buying it into a portfolio or something like that, then you can clearly, mention this in any crypto company that you're interested in joining, right? So it's about, to use agent terminology, identify your unique selling points, right? So, but it does take a bit of strategizing over sometimes a number of years, whether until you can effect the change that you want.
Okay, it's great. And this one, the next one though is a very long one. I was reading it and I was thinking whether we should answer it. It's a bit of a tricky thing. Yeah, and maybe some people might say it's a bit controversial. But this question is a legitimate question that we sort of see from job seekers. And as you can see from this one, it's very long. In an environment where costs are concerned, right? The more senior you are, the higher your salary expectations, right? This then poses a problem when companies or cost-conscious firms do not want to take on higher costs because of the risk of firing someone senior who's overqualified, gets bored quickly, and or sees the role as a stepping stone or foot in the door. As a result, it seems to be easier to get a role of compliance in another firm when you have 3 to 5 years of experience versus someone who has more than 12 to 15 years, right? It's not easy to switch to a junior role, even if you're willing, because of the overqualification bias mentioned earlier. So then how do senior executives then tackle this when they want to switch careers or look for new roles? Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, firstly, I would say if salary is the major consideration and you're earning a lot now, then a lot of people might be tempted to stay where they are, because you will face some kind of salary adjustment, right? Moving outside a large established financial institution. But what you mentioned can, in my view, really only be tackled due to personal relationships. If somebody knows you within the institution and says, okay, I'd rather get you in as compared to somebody else because of the ABC, you need a champion within the institution. Otherwise, if it's completely mathematical and cost driven, you're right. Why don't they just get the
Junior
cheaper,
person, right?
sometimes
Yeah.
younger person, right? So that's why I think in this conversation to emphasize very much on networking, and also this concept of
Yeah.
the, maybe we have not mentioned this, but like hidden market, right? When you have jobs which are not advertised, like suddenly my drive-off job was not advertised at the time that I was reached out to. And a lot of people are thinking about hiring, but they just haven't decided the actual job spec to advertise it. And you need to be out there early, talking to people and forging relationships, because you never know in the future they might have something for you.
Okay. And to the person who wrote that, I hope that helps. Okay, so at this juncture, maybe if you just bear with me, at this juncture, can I ask my colleague Elisa to just launch this very quick survey for us? For folks who have attended our sessions, we always run a survey and then we collect and collate the results of this survey. This survey, I can guarantee you, takes you less than 30 seconds, even if you think about it. But it means the world to us because it helps us think about our programming, the quality of the programming, whether you enjoyed it and what you want to see in the future. So if you could, as many of you participate, it would be great, be very helpful for us while I continue asking sort of like questions to Mabel from the people that's put in some questions. Okay, so the next one, Mabel, as you can see, is how do you think compliance will evolve over the next decade, given the rise of AI, robot advisory? Will it evolve into a compliance technology role managing such AI, or will it retain its current face-to-face role with the business? I think that's kind of similar to that question I sort of asked you just now about the nature of the compliance in, say, DriveWell, for example. And maybe we can try to answer this person's question.
Yeah, I think that it depends very much the kind of business that you're involved in as a compliance officer, right? Because say something like wealth management, where I spend a lot of time in, I think that the trend is still more of the same because, there's a lot of focus on AML, investor suitability, and so on and so forth. I don't think there will be immense changes coming up. Clearly, there will be more AI tools, but it's still slow in coming because there's a lot of testing that has to happen when you're dealing with private information and customer portfolios and customer information, right? But one trend I would say is that what I'm seeing is that a lot of movement out of compliance into what we call the 1 or 1.5 line, which is basically a growing community of business risk. Basically, this is the front or the front office actually having its own risk people. Because and more compliance ending up into more of a independent control function in large firms. The job has become almost much more audit-like than it was before. So I think as in maybe moving along in the same direction, because of that, it's likely to be less advisory as we go into the future. The advice will probably move to a different department, and compliance will be more basically kicking the tires and auditing that various policies and procedures have been complied with. But I'm talking really from the standpoint of large firms and smaller firms. I'm sure, like me, there are a lot of institutions where you end up with a jack of all trades still, right? So it's very hard to give a standard answer to this question.
Okay, no problem. And then the next one, maybe it's kind of like aligned to that as well. Would you say that fintech has more gray regulatory expectations as compared to traditional banks and asset managers?
I wouldn't say more gray. The regulations are the same, right? Whether or not you are a bank or a payment service provider is subject to same set of MES regulations. For the businesses that you do. But what I would say is that the risk culture mindset may be different, and it's also different across banks, right? It's a function of how many fines the bank has paid, whether it has a big remediation program that has touched all levels of the organization. So you find that what a bank says no to in Bank A might be something perfectly acceptable to Bank D, right? So that there is always going to be this scale depending on the culture of the organization. So it's not fintech versus banks; it's really organizational differences.
Okay. And we're gonna make it in good time. Two more questions that I see so far. So the second last one is I think this one relates to what you mentioned just now about the associations, organizations. So which compliance related associations, organizations can someone who is looking to pivot into compliance consider joining as an associate member to build networks? Or maybe, if you know of any, casual, sort of like networks that people can join, or groups that people can join, if
Yeah, I
you're aware.
probably wouldn't be able to name every single
Mhm.
organization out there. So I'll just, just suggest a few things, and I hope that some of you can actually do some research. I mean, clearly ACAMS, if you're interested in AML, there's this body that issues the certifications, right? That actually organizes events from time to time. So you can actually look at that. But it's not just organizations, but look at, courses, right? I do think that in some of the training institutes, you put into also groups of people as you're doing projects, and you get to know other people quite well. And I think that's a way to possibly create opportunities for yourself.
Okay. I like this one a lot as well. Very, very personal. Mabel, looking at your professional background, I see that you have been in a few major banks. What made you move from one to another? I guess my question is also to help me decide when is a good time to move, and what push/pull factors are involved in your, or were involved in your thought processes.
Yeah, when I started my organization, I didn't think, I didn't plan it such that, oh, I will only work in these kinds of banks and, in these kinds of roles, whatever. I basically chose the best opportunities that came about, right? So firstly, I think that, what I've thought in my career is choose the best institutions that you can. If you have two institutions that offer you jobs, choose one that is best for you for whatever reason. This can be subjective. Then I think that you just have to build reputation for yourself internally, right? Whatever it may be, a person A, can really do the job, or, is really good at the business, whatever it is, give yourself a unique selling point. Then that will naturally create opportunities for you, as even your ex-colleagues move to other firms. They'll say, oh, I remember Mabel or whoever, she knows her stuff in this area, right? So I think that, you just basically have to create the reputation and always do the job that you want to be promoted into. And then people can visualize you getting more senior and offer you the jobs in the right institutions. So it has been relatively unplanned for me, but you have to create the circumstances, as I've been saying throughout the session.
Okay, awesome. And one final question came in. Let's do this one, and then we'll just sort of end with some final words. Okay. So this one, okay, hope you can answer. On the technical aspects of compliance, can you please elaborate its relative importance and marketability as compared to non-technical compliance? In
That's an
particular, yeah.
interesting one. I don't really know exactly what to make out of this question, because I do think that compliance as a job is technical, because you need to know the rules and regulations and advise the team on what to do, and to achieve a certain outcome, right? So it's always going to be technical, but I would say that the soft skills of compliance are also equally important, right? My recipe for success is that you need to 1/3 know the rules, 1/3 get along with people, and 1/3 is common sense. So if you don't have these three things, then it's actually very hard to be a very good compliance officer.
Okay. I said I wanted to take that one as the last one, but the one just popped in, and I really want to take this one. So sorry, I promise. Last one. Okay, this one is very pertinent because we hear this a lot. So he asks, or she asks, I'm in operations, and I would like to pivot into compliance. Besides courses, how do you think I may be marketable to new hiring managers? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there? Yeah. Do you have a silver bullet answer to this one?
Yeah, so quickly, you need to actually, I don't know which operations function you're in, because operations can be very specialized as well. So I'd like to look at operations people in account onboarding for KYC related roles and compliance. So payments people can be also useful for payment screening, etc. So you need to leverage off the know-how or your understanding of certain banks' internal processes, and see what compliance roles, look at that area closely, so that you can marry up your skill versus what is needed.
Okay, Ken. I'm just gonna ask a question again, just curious, right? If this person comes from like for example, trade support, which is kind of different, right? You know, reversing your trades, working with traders and so on and so forth, and says, I want to move into compliance, right? Would you say that that one is a bit of a bigger leap? And if so, how can someone then, you know, justify or at least, you know, catch your attention, like, you know, in terms of, you know, when the person submits a resume or something like that and says, hey, look, I did this for so long, but I want to do this now.
Yeah.
What do you think a person can do, you know, yeah, to catch your eye?
It's not impossible, right? I mean, you have trade, you know, if you know trade support, then you know order taking and trade flows and settlement,
Yes,
all that pretty
yes.
well. And equities compliance or fixed income compliance might actually
Mm-hmm.
need that, or be able to have somebody who can at least do controls in those areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, you have to, you know, see what you know very well about, and bring it to your compliance and recruiting manager and see whether that would add value. You mentioned trade. I mean, another area like trade finance, right? I find that trade finance operations people really good at understanding all the trade risks and documentation. So they make really good compliance officers for trade
Right.
finance areas as well.
Awesome. Okay. So, and as you were talking, I was making a sort of like a word bubble kind of like thing, right? And I just want to summarize to everybody who's here today before I just wrap off and let Mabel say a few words, right? I think that in summary, Mabel, you talked a lot of there's a lot of stuff that we talked about, and I summarized them in a few things, right? We talked about, you know, like for example, the resume has to have very interesting selling points. That's what I wrote, right? And then the resume has to be structured such as attractive, and it's like bait that baits a fish, and then, you know, you hopefully you get called for an interview. And when you're in an interview, then you should know how to sell yourself or interview well, right? And at any point, just correct me, I add on, right? I also wrote the words curiosity. I wrote the words learning and educating and upskilling yourself, right? In terms of in terms of you know, jobs, I wrote words like, you know, again, like what you mentioned, networking, knowing people, personal relationships, hidden job markets. That's what I wrote, right? Those are the very important things, right? And also, I think proactivity, looking at transferable skills, and then, you know, being just basically being memorable, right? Like what you mentioned, right? People know you, remember you, even if you don't see this person. I know someone, you know. So memorability is very important, and also making good impressions. So that you can leave those memorable impressions. Did I leave anything out, Mabel?
Oh, I
Is there
think
any?
that
Yeah,
I would. I have this poster, so I thought I would actually share it with people. Well, I thought it'd be nice to do.
that's nice.
So I think
Yeah.
that, you know, that's kind of like the baseline you at least need to do.
Yeah, and so I hope, you know, for everybody who's in the session, I sort of like kind of summarize what I felt were the key things. Very, very heavy on the fact that you really need to have a very strong network, like what you mentioned, and the people that will help you out, you know, treat people right, and then hopefully, you know, when the time comes, they'll lend a helping hand, help you tap the hidden job market, and so on and so forth. So before I let you go, Mabel, I just want to ask, is there any sort of like last words for our friends here in the audience who maybe in, you know, different phases of their lives, you know, maybe, you know, in a job right now, wanting to move to something else, or, you know, or not in a job right now and wanted to get back into the, you know, into the market again, having the rough patch, for example. I mean, any sort of general last words for folks who are here today?
Yeah, I would just say, you know, don't be scared, right? I mean, this is about taking risks sometimes, but if you don't push yourself, it's like exercise, whatever. If you don't try to go further or lift more or whatever your spots were, you don't stretch yourself. So I think that you need to change your mindset. Don't pigeonhole yourself. Take some risks. Look at what's out there. Put yourself out there. Ask some silly questions, even, and you never know what might happen.
And me, the career advisor, right? Would you say that that's be
Yes,
valuable,
of
right?
course. I'm sure you're going to flash your contact details soon.
Yeah, I'm sure Elisa is going to be writing our email addresses, or if you are looking for an appointment, please reach out to us, and we'll try our best to help you out. You know, any of those areas that you feel like you might have a blind spot. But otherwise, Mabel, it was great to finally do this with you. Thank you for, you know, spending that time. I just want to also say, you know, you're always smiling, which is amazing. So I know it's a very strange thing to say, but I think it makes all the difference because it is sort of like, you know, lightens everything and makes me feel very comfortable as well. But look forward to working with you again. And I hope everyone in the audience learned something today. So thank you again for the time. And I guess, I'll let you go. Have a very good, pleasant week and a weekend as well.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Take care,
Okay.
guys.
Bye everyone.
Bye-bye.